Okay, welcome back. Back in the introduction to JavaScript, I mentioned that one of the important reasons for learning JavaScript is that we can use it to make our pages interactive. It's how we can run code when a user clicks on a button, or types something in, or hits the arrow key, or whatever they do. We can have some corresponding code that is executed at a given point in time, not just executed right at the beginning of the page load. So to do that, we need to talk about DOM events. So this video will be an introduction to DOM events, conceptually, the process for setting them up, and then also the syntax. So as I mentioned, events are everywhere. Think about when you interact with a web page, the different things that happen. You can click on things like a button. You can hover over a link and something might pop up. You can drag and drop elements on certain pages. You might want to have code that runs when the user double clicks. Or actually this web page has a few examples. This slides.com is a website, and I'm hitting the left and right arrow keys to change slides. So some code is being run when I hit the left arrow key or the right arrow key. Or when I click over here, that's also an event, and it's doing something. It's running some code that's changing the current slide. So the point is, events are all over the place, and they're really exciting. It's one of my favorite topics to teach because now we can make our web pages interactive. We can take the manipulation stuff that we've been learning about, changing colors, changing text, and then we can actually do that when something in particular happens. So this really unlocks the potential of manipulating the DOM. It's how we're going to make games. It's how we'll make form validators. Tic-tac-toe, we're going to make a really cool color picker game, and that all stems from these events. So the way that these events work is that we actually attach them to specific elements. So we select an element, like the first button, or the second H1, or the input where type is equal to text, and then we attach an event listener to that selected element. So as an example, we might be listening for a click on a button. We might listen for a hover event on an H1. We might listen for a key press event in a text input. And we'll talk more about the differences between those events. There's so many different types of events in JavaScript, but what's important is that we have to have an event that is being listened for on a given element. So just like before when I would talk about select and then manipulate, that still applies. We need to select something, and then the manipulation that happens is us adding an event listener to that thing that we selected. There's one method in particular that we're going to use all the time, which is called add event listener. So add event listener is what we use once we select an element like the first button or input type equals password, and we have something selected. Then we call add event listener on it, and we give two arguments. The first one is the type of event that we want to listen for, and the second argument is the code that we want to run when that event happens. So here's an example. I'm selecting the first button on a page. It doesn't really matter where the button is or how it looks or anything, just any button. And then I'm calling button.addEventListener click. And then the second argument is a function that goes all the way to here. And this code isn't run right away. Remember, this is called a callback. This code is not run immediately. It's only run once this event fires. So once you click on the button, JavaScript goes and it calls back this function, says, hey, it's your moment to shine, come back here, ready, let's execute you. And then that code is run, and we get console.log, someone clicked the button. So this function will run whenever a button is clicked, or whenever the specific button that we selected is clicked. So here's another example. This case, I have the markup here, a button and a paragraph. And I selected both of them with query selector, and I save them both to variables. And then all that we do is add a click listener, so button.addEventListener click, and then the second argument is that callback function. And what we're going to do whenever that button is clicked is change the paragraph's text content to be someone clicked the button. And you can see when I click that button, it changes from no one has clicked me yet to someone has clicked the button. So now I'm going to do a quick demonstration using our DOM demo page. Let's start by making this H1 right here change color when a user clicks on it. So to do that, we need to start always by selecting the H1. So we have a bunch of options there. I'm going to just use query selector, document.query selector, h1. Make sure we have it. All right. Then we just write h1.add event listener. Remember, there's two arguments. The first one is the event that we're listening for. And we'll spend some more time talking about the different events, the different options. For now, we're just doing click. And the second one is the code we want to run when the user clicks. So function. And let's start really simple and just do an alert when the user clicks. So we'll do alert h1 was clicked, just like this. And now let's hit enter. Nothing changes right away, but now if I click on this h1, so I'll close this. If I click anywhere on the page, aside from the h1, nothing happens. As soon as I click the h1 though, it tells me h1 was clicked. So that's important. It only applies to the h1. But that does mean I can go over here and click, because remember, if I inspect this, the h1 goes all the way across the screen. So just something to keep in mind. That's fine for us in this case. But it will pop up occasionally where things behave a little bit different than you might want them to. And you need to use some CSS maybe to shorten this h1, or you change your listener. Anyways, so rather than just alerting, let's try doing something else. And if I just hit the up arrow and add event listener click, and I change the code in here, and I do something like h1.style.background equals, and let's do orange background, and I hit enter, again, nothing changes right away. But when I click, pay attention to what happens. The first thing that happens is that it still says in an alert that h1 was clicked. And then when I close that, it then changes to be orange. So the moral here is that we can have more than one listener on a given element. When we click on that h1, the first listener that we added was listening for a click, and it ran an alert. And then we added another listener afterwards that also listened for a click, but it changed the background color. So when I click, both of them run. And that's always going to happen for now. If I click again, I get the alert, and it's changed to orange. Of course, you don't see that because it was already orange, but you have to trust me, it keeps changing it to orange over and over and over. Okay, I'm going to refresh and get rid of all of that. I also want to do a quick demonstration by adding a listener to the UL. So let's do document.querySelector UL. And remember, we have 3 LIs inside of this one UL. So I'm going to show you what happens when we set it on a parent element, like the UL. And I'm not going to use a variable. I'm just going to do this here. Add event listener. Click. So that's the first argument. The second one is the function that we want to run. Just like this. And I'm going to start, let's just do a console.log UL was clicked. And you know what? That's passive voice. Bad idea. Let's do you clicked the UL. Much, much better. Okay, so let's keep the console open and let's click on the UL. But how would we click on the UL? Because the UL has 3 LIs inside of it. The UL is this entire thing right here. So any click, doesn't matter which LI I'm on, just anywhere in the UL, you can see the number incrementing here. Any click on the UL is going to execute this console.log. So let's refresh one more time. And this time, let's say that I want to change the LI itself. When I click on an individual LI, I want something to happen. There are a few ways of doing that, and we're going to start with just the simplest one, which is attaching one listener to each LI. As a heads up, what we will be doing eventually is attaching one listener to the UL, and then inside of that listener, we're going to detect which LI specifically inside the UL was clicked on, all with one listener. For now, though, we're going to add a separate listener to every LI, so we need to start by selecting the LIs. So var LIs equals document.querySelector all LI. Make sure we have them all. All right. Then we need to do a for loop So for var I equals 0, remember that I said we'd be doing this all the time. So I less than lis.length, I plus plus, just like that. And then inside of here, we're actually going to add a listener to each individual li. So that looks like this, li's I. So that gives us the specific li, dot add event listener, click, function, just like that. Indent this a little bit. And then the code that we want to run, let's change the color of the li that was clicked on. And let's just change it to be purple. So we have a few different options. What I need to do is refer to the li that was clicked on. So I could do this, li's I, although that's not really a great solution because there's a much easier way of doing that, which is to use the this keyword. So inside of a listener, the keyword this refers to the item that was clicked on, or the item that was hovered on, or the item that the key press occurred in. Whatever the element that goes right before the dot add event listener, whatever is selected there, is what this refers to. So I can write this dot style dot color equals purple. And actually, let's do something more obvious. It is a small font, so let's do pink, just like that. I hit enter, nothing immediately happens. But if I click on an li, you can see that it changes to be pink. And if I keep clicking, it'll keep changing to pink. You just can't tell. So this pattern here of selecting a bunch of things, looping through them individually, and adding an event listener to each of them is really, really common. We're going to see it all the time in the next few projects that we make. The last thing I'll mention here is that you don't always have to use an anonymous function like we did here, where you write function with parentheses and you don't give it a name. You don't have to do that. You can declare a named function separately, like I did here, function change text, and then all that we have to do is say button.addEventListener click, and then we give it change text. Notice that we don't have parentheses afterwards because that would execute the function immediately, which is not what we want. So we're just passing the value of this function. We're passing the content basically to this click listener and saying, here's the function I want you to run when the user clicks on this button, but don't run it just yet. So these two will work exactly the same. It's just a matter of preference for the most part. There are some differences that we may encounter later. I much prefer to use this. The only time when I wouldn't use an anonymous function is if I needed to use that code again somewhere else outside of the click listener. So if I wanted to run it myself individually, or I wanted to run it inside of another click listener, rather than duplicating this function, I would give it a name and then duplicate just the name where I use it twice. Okay, so next up, you're going to get a chance to do some quick exercises using click listeners and some of the things we've learned in the last few videos.